G'day, welcome to another episode of Built by Dan and yet another installment in my GT40 kit build series. In today's episode, I'm going to be leaving my troubles with the fitment of the engine and transaxle behind for a little bit. I'm working in the background to resolve those. I have had a couple of people reach out in relation to the spacers for the intake manifold after the last episode. So I'm going to continue to work with them in the background and I'll come back to the engine once I get the rest of the build progressed. But for now, there are other things that I can be doing and I can be focusing my attention and efforts towards. So that's exactly what I'm going to be doing this episode. I'm going to make a start on the air conditioning system, including fit off of the condenser in front of the radiator and the evaporator within the cab. So as per usual, I have gone and got the various components out all ready to go. So we've got the condenser itself, some brackets which will utilize the radiator mount points, a couple of grommets for the bottom feet, and some adapters for the hose pipe, so that'll tap into the coolant tubes. And then I've got my dryer bottle. And we have a grumpy Spike sitting over there. So in terms of its fitment, we have a couple of mounting points here for the air conditioning unit. That's what the bracket is going to mount to. I have pre-drilled some holes in the bottom plate to mount the rubber grommets, and then I'll need to probably drill and tap a couple of fittings to support the top from the bracket. Back inside to the coolant tubes, I have the additional connections that will need to fit in here, so I'm going to have to trim down these coolant tubes slightly. After all my effort in trying to get them nice and symmetrical. I know they're not 100%, but this might actually allow me to achieve that now. And then the dryer bottle will mount just onto the front of the chassis panel here. So let's get stuck into it. Okay, so I'm going to start by trying to get these mounting bolts undone from the radiator. And get my rubber grommets installed in the bottom here. The manufacturer actually sent me a CAD drawing that showed the placement of these holes, so I knew where to put them. Hopefully that all works out well and it all lines up as it should. Excuse me, Spike. I'm going to go ahead and do these up, and hopefully they'll actually be the right spacing so there's no further washers or anything that need to go in there. There's nothing else provided, so my other rubber grommet in, and hopefully I'll be able to sit the condenser in place. A little bit just to push those lower feet down into the grommets but the holes that are actually provided in these brackets are now too high. If I raise it up any, it's just going to pull those feet out of that grommet, and there's the potential for the bottom to lift up and hit the radiator. So I think I'd rather just drill some new holes. So the idea is that I'll just drill and tap a screw in each side just to mount onto these little flanges that have been left. It's clearly out of another vehicle that's just been modified to suit, and they've just left these little tabs to fix into. Actually, just having a look on this side, there's not a lot of clearance here between this fitting and the side panel of the chassis extension here. I might actually need to just trim a corner out of that just to give it enough clearance, because there will be another fitting that has to connect onto there for the hoses then to route down into that central section. I think I'm going to have to do that before I can actually drill and tap these threads, otherwise it's not going to sit in properly. Okay, I'm going to grab some tools. I'm just going to trim this corner out. Not really too sure what sort of shape I'll do, but something that sort of keeps it sort of curved but probably back the opposite way, and then just round off the corners so it's a nice little neat trim. These holes that are already in this bracket, as I mentioned, it might have been a bit hard to see. They actually sit too high, so they won't actually fit into the little tab that's on the condenser itself. So I'll just have to drill a new hole down lower, and then I can drill it out on the bracket and then drill and tap into the tab. Okay, so I didn't film the process of just cutting this little corner, but you can see what I've done there. Basically just cut like a little square section out and then rounded the corners to make it look a bit nicer. And that's what it looked like to start with. There's a bit of stuffing around. I did actually have to undo this whole side of the radiator. I forgot how much of a nightmare it was to install that, because there are some washers that sit in down here between the bracket and the chassis panel. But there it is, all done. I will now try and put that condenser back in, and we'll see how it fits. I'm going to actually try and put one of the hose fittings onto it as well, just to make sure I do have enough clearance. Much better. So here I have my fitting. It's just enough clearance for this connection. Really happy with how that's come up. Alright, so now I need to drill a hole between this little flange, I suppose you could call, off the side of the condenser and the bracket itself. The hole that's there sits too high now, so I'm just going to drill another one down here. I've just clamped in place with some packers just to keep an equal distance on each side, and that will allow me to drill through. Let's get that started. I think I'm going to have to remove it to finish drilling the hole through this piece. The steel's relatively thick, and I don't want to sort of blow out the hole in the bracket itself. This one I just want to be careful because I do have the pipe behind it, so I don't want to go too far. So I have just drilled out the holes in the brackets just a little bit larger than that initial drill hole. The initial drill hole was the right size to tap the thread into the condenser itself. So I'm going to go ahead and install this now, and fingers crossed I'll be able to screw these in. Okay, that sits nicely. Just Still got some good clearance here for my fittings. Okay, still got a little bit of movement down the bottom, but I don't really know there's much more I can do about that. It's obviously designed to sit upright into a rubber grommet, but because this one sits on the angle, it sort of just doesn't quite hold it into place as well. I could always maybe look at, these feet are only screwed in, so I might be able to come up with something a little bit different that'll hold it in a little bit better. Maybe something that sort of protrudes down a little bit more or sort of tucks in underneath. But I can have a look at that later. At least it's all fitted off now. Now I'm going to move into adjusting those radiator hoses on the inside. I'm going to start by just removing the clips here, or the rubber lined P-clamps. To give me a bit more flexibility to maneuver these around. And then I'm going to remove the hose clamps, ready for installation of the new intercept or the T-piece for the heater. I'm going to go and grab my T-pieces now. And I think what I want to do is initially at least mount it into the center tube. But I think I want to attach this last because I think it's going to be easier to feed the silicone hose over the T-piece than it is to try and feed the corrugated or the ribbed hose into that end. There's not going to be a lot of room to play with. Just going to angle them up slightly because I do need the hoses to come up and inside back to the rear wall of the footwell in the cab. So next I want to start to get a bit of an idea as to how much I need to trim off these hoses. I'm going to start with this one first. In order to get that back to where it was roughly sitting previously, I'm just going to grab a marker, mark the tube, and then I'll know where I need to cut it. I'll probably actually remove it from the radiator itself, just so I can take it out of here and cut it somewhere where I've got room and it's not sort of springing around all over the place. Just going to mark that, so it's sort of just gone between the two ribs. I think that'll put it in a good spot. Now for this one. This one was actually a little bit short when I did the radiator install, so it didn't quite snake around as much as the other one. So I might have an opportunity here to retain some of that length. By pushing it back a little bit further and retaining some of that length, it just means that it's not sort of on so much of a curve as it's coming into that
silicone adapter. Alright, I'll go ahead and remove this again. Remove the two tubes and I'll trim them both and then bring them back and test fit them. Right, I've trimmed these down to size now. I'm just going to quickly refit them. I'm not going to tighten them up just yet. I'll come back and do that later. But I just want to see how well they actually fit. That looks pretty good. Could actually maybe do with a little bit more being taken off. Just to give some more clearance around the back here, near the shroud. I'll get that out of the way for now. Take another 2 or 3 off that. This one looks really good though. Maybe we should off first before I get too carried away. Yeah, that's good. Okay, I'll quickly trim the other one and come back and I should be able to fit both of those off. Alright, take 2. Much better. They look a lot more consistent now. All I was doing there was just trying to mark with my thumb roughly the length that I need to insert to sort of have 50-50 each end. Excellent. I'm quite happy with how that's all looking. Everything seems to sit well, line up well. I'm going to go through, fit these rubber P-clamps back down, because that sort of dictates positioning of the hose. Okay, now I'm going to go through and tighten these off. Okay. So that's all come along really nicely. I'll tape up those couple of nipples for the heater hose. I do just need to tighten up these fittings, but really happy with how that's looking. Once again, this side, just need to tighten that up. Next step will be to fit my dryer bottle. So the dryer bottle just mounts in here. It's probably not really a really defined position for it, so I'll just sort of work through and see what's going to work best. I'm just looking at it, and this hose clamp probably would have been nice if it was on the other side, but it would then sit under the brake line, so it wouldn't really be accessible in the future. So I'll just have a look how I go, but it's basically 2 P-clips, or P-clamps, so hopefully I can just put the screws top and bottom, and then the bottle will sit just off to the side. So the air conditioning kit that's been provided is a vintage air kit. So it comes with all the vintage air dryer bottle. The only thing I'm a little bit disappointed in is that they supplied a remote trinnery switch rather than just having the one that screws straight into the bottle. So then I've got a whole nother hose T-piece or joint that I need to put into the hose to accommodate a trinnery switch being screwed into that fitting. It's not ideal, so I'm probably just going to go and buy a trinnery switch that will fit directly onto the bottle. The only difference being is that the one supplied has a female thread, whereas I need a male thread for the bottle attachment. Basically, the bottle will get mounted in here. I've actually got a fair bit of flexibility as to where I can mount that, so I might just make sure I give myself some space and aim for sort of center of this piece here. I'm going to mark that up and then I'll come back and drill and tap a thread for a couple of screws to hold those P-clamps on. Alright, this isn't going to work. I'm going to have to bend these P-clips a little bit more. It's almost like they're just that little bit too small to sort of close in nicely. So we have to find a way to get them to close up a little bit better because the screws just aren't long enough to really pull it closed. Okay, so unfortunately I just cannot get these P-clips that are supplied with the dryer to fit up nicely. They just seem to be that little bit too small. I'm wondering if maybe I can go and buy a rubber lined stainless P-clip, because I don't even think these ones are stainless. You can see here I just managed to get the top screw done up. It's not great, it's sort of on a bit of an angle. It's probably just damaging the thread in the aluminium there. So I'm going to see what I can find as a replacement for those P-clamps, and I'll come back to fitting that off at another time. Alright, so it's the next weekend now. I did get a little bit carried away just looking into what's involved in fitting the evaporator unit up under the dash, and in the end got caught up with that and forgot to actually start filming anything. So I'll do a quick recap of some of the issues that I sort of was preempting and some of the work that I've done in trying to prepare for the evaporator install. So for starters, you'll notice I've taken the spider off. It's the main roof panel. And over here I have my windscreen wiper motor installed. So when I was looking into installing the evaporator unit, I tried to get it actually up under the dash here, and it's quite large. It takes up the entire passenger side footwell and through to the driver's side as well. So holding it up in there, it looks like this vent to the driver's side is actually going to potentially be blocked by the wiper motor. So I wanted to get the wiper motor installed first so that I know where that goes. It's pretty limited as to where I can put that, and then potentially look at what possibilities there are to maneuver the evaporator unit in order to get it up where it needs to be without sort of hanging down too low into the passenger side footwell, but to maximize the ability to be able to connect a vent up on this side. So as I said, it's really awkward, but I'll try and give you an idea It's just how much space this evaporator unit takes up under the dash here. Can't even work out how I got it in there the last time. There you go. So what I can gather, it needs to sit somewhere here. It's heavy and awkward to hold. So I'm not sure how much of this I'm going to be able to film, or whether you can even see what I'm trying to show you. But I think I'm going to have to try and find a way. I've got some blocks of timber here. I'll try and lift it up and support it where it needs to sit, and mark out my holes, pull the unit out, drill and tap the thread into those holes, and then try and get the unit back in. We'll see how I go filming it. Worst case, I'll just have to come get the work done and then come back and show you what I've done once it's completed. Okay, so my idea with the timber supports has actually worked really well. I've now got that evaporator unit sitting up there. I do have a photo from the manufacturer that this is roughly where it looks to be positioned based on that photo, and it also works well for me, probably just providing just enough clearance from the wiper motor that I could get the duct to come in down underneath that. Now, having installed this, or not installed it, but just having it positioned where I'm pretty confident it's where it needs to go, there's not really anywhere else you could put it, I've found another issue. So let me switch across to the driver's side and I'll show you what that is. So here you can see just how large the evaporator unit is coming across onto the driver's side footwell. Not a lot of space there. Now, when I sort of jumped onto this side and had a look at it, I had a few concerns. This bracket back here, now I've just mocked this up to be able to show what I'm dealing with, is actually just a little pivot system so that I can transfer the input from the accelerator pedal here on my pedal assembly through to what is supposed to be my electronic throttle, mounted right back there, exactly where the back of, or that back side of the evaporator unit is. So this other section is supposed to run across and push on that electronic throttle. So as you would have seen from my recent unboxing video, I have the electronic throttle pedal. It's not small. I did acknowledge that I probably needed to trim the pedal down so it wasn't so long. But regardless, this whole enclosure, which contains the throttle position sensor and everything, is not going to fit in there behind that evaporator unit. So I'm stumped, because when you look at the build manual, it shows this electronic throttle body sitting right in there. It's basically in the exact same location as the evaporator unit, and then when you look at the photos that have been provided by the manufacturer for the installation of the evaporator unit, this is exactly where the evaporator unit's supposed to sit. So probably shouldn't be surprised, but disappointed definitely. Just when you think that you've got the information you need to be able to progress another step in the build, you find something else that stops you in your tracks. Now, I don't think this is something I'm going to be able to resolve today or in this episode. I'm trying to think of ideas. The only thing that I can think of is to ditch that whole sort of bell crank setup up here and maybe mount this factory pedal directly to the back wall, up behind the pedal box, and then just have a single arm running from my Willwood pedal directly to my electronic throttle. That way, when I'm pushing on this pedal, it'll just be one connection that'll push directly back on the electronic throttle. So I'm going to have a look at what might be involved in getting that to work. It's a bit annoying because the throttle pedal, based on that wheelwood assembly, is offset, so it sort of intersects with that brace piece in the corner. So I can't necessarily get a clean install on the back wall of the footwell. But I'm thinking I might just have to cut this bracket off on this side, retain the two on this side as my mounting points, and try and get it as close as I possibly can to that corner bracket, and see how that aligns to get one of these rods to connect from one pedal to the other. I think that would provide a cleaner solution, because it's just one motion. As I'm pushing one, the other one gets pushed in as well, rather than sort of transferring around through that bell crank setup. So a bit more playing around to do. I'm tempted to fit the evaporator unit off and deal with the electronic throttle pedal as a separate issue, because the throttle pedal can potentially be relocated, but the evaporator unit definitely cannot. There's literally nowhere else for it to go in here. I'm going to take some time, think this through, and I will come back and update you on how I decide to proceed. Okay, so I know that was a lot of me just pointing and talking, but here's a photo from the manufacturer that shows the placement of the air conditioning evaporator unit up under the dash. So I'm confident that I've got mine sitting pretty much in that same position, give or take, just sitting up on those blocks in there. So that pretty much dictates everything. It's the same unit, all of that, so it can't really go anywhere else. Now, this is the electronic throttle setup for a Coyote install. You can see the bell crank over there on the bracket coming down to the pedal assembly, and also then coming across and activating the electronic throttle. So based on the positioning of that in the photo, I'm looking at this bolt, which is the center bolt for the steering rack bracket, which pretty much sits directly in line with this central tubing. So based on that, there's no way known that that electronic throttle is going to get anywhere near the center of the vehicle, particularly up that high, noting that the evaporator unit consumes all of that space. So there is another image here. You can just sort of see coming up the bell crank and the electronic throttle sitting in over there. Now, they have a better solution for a GM install. So if you are going for an LS install, the throttle position sensor actually sits off to the side above the accelerator pedal. That would work so much better, especially in an air-conditioned vehicle, rather than having it divert across into the center, where you're then encroaching on the only space that you've got to install your evaporator unit. So, great solution for the GM, but unfortunately for the Coyote, not so much. So back to the drawing board. Okay, so having just looked at those photos for reference, that's that center bolt for the steering rack that I was talking about. And there's no way known you're going to get anything in that alignment up behind this evaporator unit. Okay, I think I may have found a solution. It's not something I'm going to be able to complete today, but if I mounted this electronic throttle roughly in this position, I can then use the short arm here, drill a new hole in the wheelwood pedal, and then mount that to my electronic throttle. And that should basically provide the simplest solution, that as I push one pedal, the other one also gets activated or is pushed in. It's going to need a little bit of work, there's two mounting points here. I just have to make sure that it's going to be okay to mount to that corner brace. It should be. We're not talking a significant size hole or bolt. And the only thing I'm worried about is, or not worried about, but I need to resolve is I probably need an aluminium bushing or something for this other side so that I can mount it back to the rear wall. And just as I do that, my garage lights want to turn off. I've been laying here in the footwell for far too long. So again, it's really just this one bolt on this other side. It probably needs about, I'd probably almost say 50mm or 2-inch spacer back to the wall. But I'd rather support that side if I'm going to have it out here, because the main body of the electronic throttle, it would be cantilevered off that corner brace. So I'm just concerned that it may not have enough support. I do just want to speak to the manufacturer as well and find out whether they actually have an alternative mounting solution for instances like this where you have a Coyote and air conditioning. I'm sure it is a common combination. So in order to achieve all of that, on the back here, there's quite a lot of sort of surplus plastic molding that I really don't think is necessary. I think the strength's back here where all these strengthening ribs are, so I can probably trim quite a bit off that, basically where I'm running my finger around there, and that would provide me a little bit more ease of fitment in that corner. And the same goes for this other mount here as well. I'd basically just cut it to a corner and get rid of all this sort of circular curved bit. This is the piece that would need some sort of mounting boss to space it off the rear wall. And again, I can trim down a fair bit around there just to keep it nice and clean and tidy. Now in terms of trimming the main pedal arm, I'd basically try and follow this particular rib here. Keep the arm as long as possible, because obviously the longer the arm, the more leverage you have, so it won't provide too much sort of force back on the wheelwood pedal, making it sort of difficult to depress the accelerator. So just having a look back here, so you can see this aluminium pedal box, which I'm pretty sure was the first thing I did in this build. I'd basically need to compensate for almost that same offset for that one mounting point on the electronic throttle. So that's what I'm going to start planning for. Unfortunately, I really wish I had a mini lathe that I could actually make up my own spacers, but I don't. So I'm going to have to look at some other solutions. I may even just have to buy some rod, and some aluminium rod that is, and see how I go with my drill press, trying to drill and tap some thread in either end. But yeah, that's all I can think of. If you can think of any other solution from what you can see here, please leave a comment down below. Always happy to hear feedback. Like I said, it's not something I'm going to be rushing into modifying straight away. I just want to check that there is no other better solution or more logical solution that I just can't think of right now in my frustration. I'm going to go ahead now and just drill and tap the holes for the evaporator unit and get that fixed into place, and at least then that's one job done. I can then come back later and do the air conditioning lines, the heater lines, and the drain line, which will pop out into the wheel arch there. All right, so I've marked out, I took some measurements from underneath and then just marked out from the top. It's a hell of a lot easier to drill from the top than it is from underneath laying down in the cab. Okay, so you can see there, I've just got two M6 bolts going through. I've kept the head on the outside just so it looks cleaner when you open up the front clip. And then moving around, having a look underneath. You can see they're all fitted off nicely. It only seems to have brackets at the front here, and it just seems to sort of hang at the back, but it seems to support itself okay. So I'm just going to do a bit of research to make sure that there isn't meant to be another fixing point on these, but all in all it sits in there quite nicely. Now that I've confirmed that it fits, it's time to pull it out so I can do the modifications to that faceplate. Alright, so I've now got the evaporator out of the cabin again. So this is what we have. I was supplied in the kit with this particular vintage Air standard louver kit. So it had just the square vents directly mounted in here. There is another model which just has like an oval protruding fitment that you can then just slot the ducting onto, but for some reason that's not the one that they've supplied. So instead they give you this aluminium plate to pop rivet onto the front there, and you can then sort of just squish the ducting and sort of stick it through those cutouts and run that. So you've got, so it doesn't want to stay there, you've got your left, your under, your footwell I suppose, and then your right vent. This fitting here, I've just gone and cut a hole and fitted this. I did have to shave quite a bit of the thread off this poly fitting just to get it to fit, and just by shaving it down, leaving a little bit there to bind into the cutout, I was able just to sort of screw that on, and that's nice and tight, that's not going anywhere. So now I just need to trim this piece. It did just come with another pop rivet there, but that's not going to work. So this fitting here is for a small hose to run up to the demister in the dash. There's obviously the electrical side as well. So there is just one sort of standard plug that connects up to the rest of the wiring loom that comes with the vintage Air kit. So I can fix that up later once I get around to the electrical works. I'll go ahead, drill out these holes, cut this section, get this faceplate pop riveted on, and then I'll show you how it all looks once it's finally fitted back in the vehicle. Pulled to the side a little bit, but that's okay. It looks like I'm going to have to trim the outlets here as well, so I'll get this mounted up and then I can worry about that. Okay, lucky last. Oh, that looks like it's actually missed it now. See how it goes, because this middle one pulled across a little bit. We've just missed it, but hopefully that's just enough for it to hold it in place. Okay, probably about as good as we're going to get it. Okay, now just got to work out what I'm going to use to trim these. I might just get the Dremel and see if I can just shave it back. It is only plastic, so it shouldn't take too much. And then it'll be ready for fitment back onto the main unit here. Okay, trimmed all of that up nicely. Just originally, as you saw, cut it with the Dremel, and then I went and sanded it down with the Dremel. Ended up covering the lens in a whole heap of crap, so wasn't much to see there. But now I'm just going to fit it back onto the main unit. Reinstall the screws that were holding that on. Four more screws on the bottom and we'll be done. There we go. Just wasn't pushing it on all the way in order for it to engage with the hole that it came out of. Just while I'm doing this, I was just thinking about what I'm going to do with that one outlet here that's obstructed by the wiper motor slightly. What I might do, if it becomes an issue and I have to sort of squish the duct too much to get it past the wiper motor, I might actually just use that for the one that goes to the feet and use the two that are nice and clear for the ones that go to the left and right hand side of the dash. So that's it, all fitted up now. So that's ready for the duct to be inserted and also for the pipe to be put over that fitting to run up into the dash to the demister. All right, so I've got the evaporator installed back in under the dash, and it's just dawned on me, I have a sliding adjustment here on this bracket, so I can actually lower the front of this evaporator unit, which means I should be able to clear that wiper motor. So it's something I can look at later. Hopefully the front can come down and the back can sort of tilt up a bit higher, just to provide a bit more space here just for the feet in the footwell. All in all, I'm really happy that that's all sorted now. Not overly happy with the additional issues that I seem to be uncovering every time I try to complete another step in the build, but I'll look to get that accelerator pedal or the electronic throttle pedal sorted, and we'll be able to move forward with that as well. Next episode, I'm going to jump back into the engine bay. I'll probably end up removing the engine, and I will work to fit off either the fuel system or the coolant reservoirs, or both if I can. I think I've just about got everything that I need for the coolant reservoirs. The fuel system, having some issues with some fittings for the first stage fuel filter, so the rock filter, but hoping I can get something resolved by next weekend, and I can then crack on with that part of the build. Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you're enjoying these episodes, please consider subscribing to the channel. Only 50% of the people viewing these episodes are in fact subscribed, so please subscribe, helps a lot, and share it with anyone that may like this content. I'll be back in another couple of weeks with another episode. Thanks for watching. Alright, so here's a little bit of a teaser for those that have stuck around to the end. Just starting to clean up and put things back together, but couldn't help but go and grab the dash. There's a bit of trimming to be done to get this to fit, but gee, it looks like good. It's all coming together. I was keen to see how much the dash actually covers the evaporator sitting up under the dash, and I really have to get down low to be able to see under there, so that's really good. I have been looking at the dash and what might be involved in installing it. There's a couple of things that I'm just not too sure about. One is this step here, whether that's supposed to be there or whether it's meant to sit down flush. It obviously makes a fairly significant difference. I am just having a look now with the doors fitted as to how that shape interacts with the doors, and I think it needs to come down in order for those lines to tie in, which means that I just need to cut that bottom section off the dash to suit. So I wasn't sure whether that was intentionally meant to be a leg for it to stand on, or whether it's just the excess from the mold that hasn't been cut back. So I'd say it probably needs to be cut back somewhere up here, sit down a bit lower, and then I need to cut a slot in the side here for it to slide back. It's got to go back almost 2 inches. So that's why I can't close the door or anything at the moment. But yeah, I've been sort of chasing some information on that. Everyone seems to have a different opinion from some of the other builders that I've spoken to, possibly because they were supplied a slightly different dash, or depending on how much the manufacturer decided to trim off the dash once that was taken out of the mold. But yeah, really keen to get onto this, probably after I do the fuel system and the coolant reservoirs, and start getting all of this cut out. So air conditioning vents, all the gauges, getting my steering wheel and everything sorted and aligned in the middle there. It's going to look great. There is a bit of trimming to do on the corner here. There's just a scratch you can probably just see on the camera there, and then another one under here. So I believe they're marks that the manufacturer has provided to show the extent that I need to cut in order for it to sit back and to clear the A-pillar on the Spider. So that won't be next episode, probably the one after that. we'll just see how things go. Thanks for watching.